we can certainly also embed questions and assignments in our regular everyday activities. We do this without any announcement. We do this without any idea that this is a special test. But I just ask a question that's going to be particularly instructive for the instructor as to understanding how well somebody is learning.
I really want to talk about that from two levels because, again, I think you can tell that I'm a proponent of these alternative methods as providing, I think, a much richer set of information for us about how students learn and under what situations. The example that Diane began with about embedding a question in...
Before you go on, as a layperson, you're going to have to explain what are embedded questions.
When we develop in a course, or I'm going to talk as a second example across courses because we want to see how learning is transferred, a question, what we decide as faculty is that it's an appropriate time in the course to say to students, but not tell them in advance, that, for example, I'd like you to compare the concept we just discussed with the one we discussed last week. Powerful, all right? Do they carry that information over? Or could you explain the difference between this approach, if I'm doing that, and the approach we discussed last week? Or what is the relationship between the main point that you read for today's meeting and what we have just discussed? So it's always this movement between previous knowledge and new knowledge, and it's a raw experience. It's unrehearsed. I didn't study the night before, because what I'm interested in as a faculty member is finding out whether or not students are learning what I think I'm teaching or I'm having them learn themselves. So I need to pose a question, a situation, a problem to see if they're able to do that. In a course-embedded approach, the value to that is for me to know as a faculty member that, in fact, students are understanding this material, or else I have to say, I better not go any further, because there's so much misunderstanding that I need to clarify that. I need to do perhaps more interaction with the groups, have them solve a problem, analyze it a little bit more. But here's the best part of this, I think, that when we're talking about looking at student learning and development over time, through general education program, through programs in the major, then course embedded becomes a means for us as faculty in a program to dip down and take a look at an appropriate time to see if in fact there's transference going on in that particular program. If I'm interested in the development of ways of thinking in history or problem solving, I could say with my colleagues that after X number of courses or a period of time, we think it's appropriate to introduce a brief case study, a problem into the class, and then gather that information for us to interpret to see if in fact students are making progress. But it's legitimate to say that this is good data for us to derive to find out about student learning. Very good at midpoint career.
Well, it's really using the information midpoint, midway to change, teaching and learning and change what we're doing. It's really that assessment cycle of collecting information and then using it to improve the whole practice of teaching and learning. There's one more technique that I really like, and there's really many, there's a whole variety of techniques, but one that I've come to have a great appreciation for, and that's the use of graphic organizers, or sometimes they're called concept maps. And what that is, it involves really taking your information and creating a visual spatial display. As I've mentioned, I'm a cognitive psychologist, and we often divide information processing into processing that's verbal with words and visual spatial kind of processing. People have different strengths and weaknesses in these areas, but regardless of the topic, I have advocated that you actually use both in every kind of setting. I think it sort of allows you to spread out your knowledge, see its organization, see what's connected to it. A good friend of mine, Don Ansero at Texas Christian, has done a great deal of work on the topic, and I believe we have a video from him.
Mapping is a visual language, and it's very similar to flow charts and organizational charts. And in those maps, we have nodes or boxes connected together by lines, and the lines indicate the relationships between the ideas that we're trying to express in those maps. We've used them in a lot of different ways, as have other people. And one way is to present information. That's the most common way. So the teacher makes a map and uses it to present information on an overhead or on the chalkboard. And we also use them in collaborative learning, where we have pairs of students get together and make maps together, and as substitutes for term papers, so that we use them rather than having students write about something, they go ahead and map about it, and then we can evaluate those term maps rather than term papers. And we find that it's useful because when people do writing, they tend to string things out linearly, and mapping allows you to kind of condense things and organize it better. And if you're not a good writer, you can still be a good mapper. And so for a lot of people who don't have great verbal ability, it doesn't mask their knowledge of the content that you're trying to get across, so you can see it more clearly.
There's a number of reasons that I like to use these as a test. One is we use them in the counseling arena, for example, and they allow the counselor to see gaps in a client's thinking about a personal issue. Same thing is true with students. When they're having some sort of information that they're presenting, it's very easy and quick for an instructor to see how are they partitioning out their information, how are they grouping their ideas, and how are they seeing those ideas be connected. A lot of times if you have a lot of students in a big class of 100 students or 60 students, and you want to get some information or access into their heads about how they see how things are connected, going through even a 5-page paper or a 10-page paper that they've written out, it's going to be very difficult for the professor, not only in terms of their own fatigue going through it, but also it's a quick and I think reliable way of seeing how their ideas are being laid out on the page. It's hard to know as far as a strict test, what is better as far as can we get more valid representation of what a student knows in a paper versus a note-link map. That's a hard question to answer because they are different visually, and the content of the information is more difficult. One thing that you have to be concerned about, I think, as a professor, is that you don't let the creativity or how nice a map looks guide the grade completely. You have to be very clear up front what percentage of the point is for creativity, what percentage is for accuracy, what percentage is for content, and what percentage is for organization, much like you would for a paper. But you really need to specify that up front and then keep to that, not allow yourself to be really intrigued by some real creative one and then not look at what's really there. Are the ideas really good ideas? Are they well connected? Are they well thought out? Are they well organized?
Wherever traditional language is being used to communicate, I think maps can be used. So any course that, and in fact, I think it can be used even beyond that, because in math courses, I think it can be used as well, where language isn't the main sort of approach. There's limitations to it, don't get me wrong. I mean, I think that the main limitation is some people have troubles thinking spatially. And I'm not sure the basis of it. I'm not sure psychologists really know why some folks have trouble with directions and trouble with spatial organization and things like that. But they sometimes have an emotional reaction to the sort of visual nature of the maps. But I have seen once we get them over that, it's okay. But there is some sort of reaction. And so, and because the maps often are very information intensive, there's no word clutter in maps. In text, you've got lots of words there that are just carrying the conversation along, just carrying the idea along. But in maps, it's all real. It's all ideas. It's all relationships. And people become a little intimidated by the richness of that and the penetration of that information to really understand it. So it has some problems. But I think once people get used to it, just about anybody could use it.
Yeah, it was a wonderful video. I think you made a number of very good points there about the use of concept maps, and there are really many, many ways they can be used. You could use them as a value-added index by looking at the concept maps students or groups of students draw at the beginning of learning a concept, and then later on at the end, the way things are connected, those sorts of issues.
I think it's actually a wonderful way also to trace cognitive development in students. There's a wonderful example of the difference between problem solving for novice architect students and advanced architect students. And what the research showed is that when each is presented a problem, the novice tend to see all pieces of the problem as equal to deal with at the time of solving the problem. But in the later stages, they become more mature at solving problems, create a mental hierarchy of how best to solve this problem, which becomes a more efficient way. If that's in fact one of the characteristics of an architect student, I think the question it raises is how do we foster that kind of learning, and could we track it, for example, through mapping to show how they actually do solve problems?
Another kind of assessment that's been growing in popularity is the use of portfolios. And the portfolios probably were originally used in art departments. And we all have the idea of an art major carrying one of those large satchels, around from place to place, and they open it up and here's my work.
Right.
Look at my art, this is what I can do, and this is a sample of my work.
So are you saying that any student now carries a portfolio?
No,
to
they
show
don't carry it. We have new ways of storing it. But we are using it across virtually any major you can imagine. What a portfolio is, in the broad sense, is a sample of your work. And there are lots of ways that portfolios can be put together. A big growth in the use of electronic portfolios, where you simply put everything electronically, since it's so much easier to access and store. But they're used in a variety of majors. And you could tell students, for example, we want samples of your average work. Or we can tell them we want samples of your best work. We can say that we want to collect it over a variety of courses or over your entire college career. And if we collect it over a college career, then in fact, that also allows us to see those changes. A lot of people are using the portfolios then in a capstone course or senior year course where the student is asked to reflect on their 4-year growth, their 2-year growth in learning, and what does it show about their own strengths and weaknesses, what does it show, cause them reflection on their own learning. Very, very powerful sort of growth in metacognition, where you have to think about what you know and how well you know it. So it serves a variety of purposes, but it's used in virtually every major.
And Diane has talked about how it can be used to measure an individual person. However, I think it can also be used to evaluate a whole program. And in a case like that, you might have a whole set of portfolios looked at by an external evaluator would come in and review the department and read all the portfolios and identify strengths and weaknesses. And if that were happening, then one could actually say, maybe we need to beef up the curriculum in this area and we're very strong in this other area. And that's a nice way that portfolios can be used in that regard.
And I just see it as a tremendously powerful complementary option in terms of assessing student learning. Because what we have before us then is a body of students' work, and we can select samples over time. We can ask students to build in self-reflective pieces, which turns out that the research is showing that self-reflection is a very significant aspect of learning. It's not just that students spend time on a task, it's what they do in that time. So building in self-reflection enables us to see how they are thinking about something, enables us to understand how they connect their experiences to what they have learned or have not learned so that we can adjust the curriculum, respond to it, but provides us a lot of raw and information and has very high face validity because students are including in that work that is responsive to the particular situations and assignments in the curriculum.